Doug Breault is a Boston-based interdisciplinary artist who works with photography, painting, sculpture, and video. In addition to his art practice, he curates exhibitions at Gallery 263, teaches art students at Babson College and Bridgewater State University, and contributes articles to Boston Art Review, Lenscratch, the Harvard Art Museum, and the Bridgewater Review. Doug talks about his evolution from creative writing to photography, which then began to intersect with other forms of art. How an interdisciplinary approach to art making allows the idea to come before the material, and the themes of loss and memory that run through his work. Here's my conversation with Doug. Thank you for being so open to being a guest today. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
There was something about the serendipity of receiving your message about Dana, and then I thought, I think I want to talk to that guy.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I was looking at their website and then I saw the podcast. That's how I fell into the rabbit hole. But yeah, serendipity for sure.
Oh, great. I'm happy to be maybe just one stop down your rabbit hole. I don't know how far you went, but I was
Yeah.
happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you again. I'm excited.
Well, so I will just introduce you very briefly because interdisciplinary artist always kind of makes me stand back and wonder quite how to ask about it. So first I'll just introduce you as Doug. And what led you to work in the area of interdisciplinary art?
I think it's something that wasn't planned necessarily. When I was a college student, I first took a photography class, like a dark photo class, without any background experience in art at all. It was really just something I needed to fill the course requirement, and it just went from there where I was really interested in it. Originally, I was a creative writing major. I realized I was spending more time in the darkroom working on my prints than any other homework for any of my courses that I was taking, and I really kind of just decided to jump in with 2 feet. And then as I was taking other art classes as a student, you get exposed to different media and things. And I really continued to gravitate towards these tactile processes of sculpture and painting and all these different materials that were really exciting to me because it was really something I had no experience with. And I think photography came really naturally to me, and something like painting did not. And I think that challenge of wanting to learn and be better at it began to see how these different medias and disciplines can kind of like overlap and inform each other. So I think it kind of fell into place because there were some things that were really challenging that I still enjoyed doing. And then I started to think about how I was working in like a painting practice and a photo practice. And then it began to really naturally be like, well, these things can overlap and intersect. And it's kind of just been that way since. The idea can kind of come out in these different forms and different ways of either producing an image or an object, and then thinking about how those things can inform each other can be really interesting and exciting and not feel limited to like this as my square painting and I have to make a painting kind of thing, where it can feel a little bit more limiting or daunting sometimes.
I find that really interesting about interdisciplinary art in that each project you can approach and pick from the different mediums you want to use to create a piece, maybe. But that can also vary over time. So it's not that every time you approach a piece, you're always bringing together the same combination of media.
Yeah. And I think that feels really exciting too, to kind of bounce and flow in between different ways of working. Because I think there's a difference between like using a camera to take a picture or arrange a subject for your camera versus rendering it with drawing or painting, or does it make more sense to have the object be the thing versus photographing it? So there's all these different ways of thinking about how it can kind of come into fruition, which can be just more puzzle pieces to mess with.
Do you think that might make an interdisciplinary artist more likely to think about themes? Not that you have to have commonalities across works, but maybe more likely because you're less focused on the medium?
I think so. Like for me now, I think if I was to make a strict, like this is a painting object, it would feel really strange to me to feel limited between like these are my brushes, this is my paint, this is the canvas, and this is kind of the boundaries of making something with a theme versus knowing that it's a tool that I have that I can layer into, you know what I mean, different ways of creating it. So I think maybe it's like the inspiration or the idea comes before the material, which can be, I think, a different process than people who are like, I sculpt in stone, and you're using that process of stone sculpting and reductive sculpture to like come up with a theme versus like the idea leads you into the material. Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely.
I have friends who are artists who that sounds really scary to them, where it's like they are outstanding oil painters or outstanding dark photographers or things like that. And they're like, I don't want to deviate from those boundaries because that's where they can really produce these really rich, interesting artworks also. So it's not that one is necessarily better than other. I think it's more of just the way that you kind of pull out that thread to figure out that idea.
So if I just elaborate on that for a minute, because my head went somewhere as far as when you focus on one medium, you're continuing to develop your skills and strength and confidence in that medium. And when you're experimenting across multiple, does that mean you allow yourself a bit more space to say, I don't have to be like the best painter in the world. I
I
just need to.
Yeah, I think so. So for me personally, like one of the challenges I had when I was applying to graduate schools is some programs make you pick mediums within their programs. Like you have to apply as a painter or as a photographer. And I've encountered some grad school interviews where they were like, well, you're more of a photographer than a painter. Or interviewing for photography programs where they're like, well, you're more of a painter than a photographer. So even within those categories, sometimes it's not like you fit neatly into a box or someone who is like, say, a very strict, formal, outstanding photographer will be like, well, what you do is different. And I think that's something too, where it's not necessarily unusual for artists to kind of live in these different spaces of working with different mediums and things. But I think sometimes it can be hard to kind of build your own confidence of like, well, no, it is a type of photography. It just has like it's an object. It's painted onto a surface or something versus it just being like a strict rectangle that's matted and framed and within those like formal qualities of like this is what photography should look like. Different interactions with different people, whether they're artists or curators or writers, maybe sometimes they don't get it and sometimes they're all about it. And I think that's another interesting kind of way to navigate figuring out how you even talk about your own work or figure out where you want your art to live or like how you want it to go out into the world.
So let's leap off from there as far
Yeah.
as your art going out in the world. Can I start by asking you what themes you tend to explore in terms of what you'd put forward about your work?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of at a point now where I've been probably making art for about 10 years now, I would say, give or take. And I think I've noticed that the last 10 years I keep returning to a lot of the same themes about like loss and memory, even what can a photograph hold as far as the context and history and information. I lost my dad to suicide when I was 19, which was kind of right when I started to think about becoming an artist. So I think a lot of times too, I think about my own relationship to him in my work, whether it's like literally the work is about him or a little bit more abstracted about this idea of like how memory functions. Or as I get older, I'm realizing that I have similar characteristics or traits to him or mannerisms and things, whether it's my appearance or the way I speak or things that interest me that maybe I didn't understand when I was younger that he did that now I understand more. Those are always layered into my work, whether it's a little bit more literally and like this work is about my dad, or a little bit more metaphorically or subdued and kind of how it's incorporated into things. I think when I've tried to stray away from those themes and ideas and maybe branch out to a different direction, it kind of always naturally comes back to it and kind of shifts, which I think is really interesting to see how one idea about memory or life and death and all those things can keep occurring, but in different tones and visuals and perspectives and things. So I think that's what makes it still feel like an unresolved kind of idea that I'm working on in my work, even if it's not so black and white, maybe to everybody else.
Can you describe one of those pieces that you've made about your dad?
There's one that I did, I think this one was like 2022, where like he passed away in 2009. So he did not have like a large digital presence. Like there's not a lot of stuff on him online. He wasn't on social media and all that kind of stuff. But I'm always kind of digging through online archives and websites and things just to find photos or information about him just from this scavenger hunt perspective. So I have like a folder on my computer with hundreds of images and like Google Street View map screenshots and places that he lived or traveled to and like places that I grew up. So it's just like this archive of stuff connected to him. So there was one image that I found where it was a picture of him at a wedding. I think the picture was taken with a point and shoot camera or something. So there was this weird like glitch flash kind of thing where it was his hand almost seemed like it went into this like shape of light. Like it was this almost like a weird like image glitch. So I started to just print these things and cropping them in different perspectives. And then I took a photograph of myself, like a self-portrait with like a 4x5 camera with all of these mirrors in front of me. So I'm reaching out my hand and it's reflected in these mirrors in different places. So one of the pieces that I have is this image of my dad's hand really large and then this photograph of me on top of it. So these are kind of like layered with like a clear archival gesso together and then kind of stitched a little bit together with paint to make this kind of like one flattened image. I was like, okay, I'm responding to this image of my dad's hand that to anybody else maybe like wouldn't look like anything interesting or special. It's not like this artwork. And because the photo is printed larger, it has these kind of glitches and pixelations in it too. It's just this process of like, okay, how do I respond to this image of my dad's hand and the idea of like holding hands or connecting of like my hands kind of look like his hands now or so even these kind of really like simple memories and connections of kind of building this image that doesn't exist in real life with my own image and his, creating it on my own terms. And it's a very small, like an 8x10 little piece that just came together in this process. I hate to use the word intuitive process because I think all artwork making is like an intuitive process, but maybe it's like more of like a problem solving set or like what happens if this meets with this.
I think you've said a couple of times now that people might not understand what the idea is behind or the intuition maybe behind your work is. They won't know it's your dad's hand. They won't necessarily get what it means to you. So, what does that mean for you as an artist when people are interacting with your work in terms of their takeaways when they don't have
Yeah.
access to?
I tend not to over explain. So if I'm doing like a solo exhibition or something, I try to keep the information concise, but also giving enough information where people can run with it. So even like sharing that quick story about my dad and how he passed and all those things, and that was like a huge impact on why I became an artist. I put it out there and then I let people kind of see those connections in the work. And I think the reason why I feel comfortable with that is because more often than not, people seem to understand it or bring to it something that reminds them of their family members or has the same kind of spirit as what I'm thinking about. So I feel like that's something that I find really interesting. Like I've read a couple exhibition reviews of my work and I'm like, wow, they really hit the nail on the head without asking me any questions or things. So I think that's the other thing I'm interested in is like that boundary of how much information is enough information and then how much of it is letting it be up to the person viewing it of what it means or how they react to it and kind of feel that connection.
That was one of the interesting things that came out when I spoke with Dana about her photographs, because she talked about one that has pink balloons sort of
Yep.
trapped in the window.
Yeah.
And for her, that evokes a lot of sadness, and
Hmm.
that she would speak to people who looked at it saying, "Wow, that brings me a lot of joy, that photograph." And
Yeah.
so I just find that really interesting when people can come with such a different interpretation, but that's not got anything to do with you and what
Mm.
work you've put out. It's just a completely you've just somehow engendered that interpretation in them.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why I like working interdisciplinary because I think there's this idea of like invention that I really like of I'm inventing an image and creating something where photography sometimes can feel more of like a one for one of like I'm replicating what I see in an image versus layering things of paint or multiple images together or having it be like printed or made into an object that then interacts with the viewer's body, which feels differently. So I think that's part of why I like that range of being able to see how all these things function to create a different experience than what maybe just like a printed photograph can do or a painting. And that's not me dismissing those media. I think for me, I just feel very limited of what I can do with those personally, of thinking about, I don't know, how to communicate this feeling of memory or loss or inventing an image that maybe didn't happen that I wish happened, or a feeling of sadness like Dana does, or melancholy is not the right word, but more of just like a lot of people are thinking about a lot of heavy things, whether it's grief or things happening in the world right now that affect us directly or indirectly. So I think a lot of times there's a lot of this work that I make that takes sometimes a small 8 by 10 painting will take me 5 years, like mixed media work will take me 5 years because I don't know what it means to me or I haven't figured it out yet. And I'll just live with it and it'll be on my wall and I'll flip it upside down and try a different thing or scrape all the paint off. So I think that's part of what feels comfortable to me too, is having that space to really settle with it and not just feel like I'm producing stuff to produce things and wanting to feel like it resonates with me before I put it on the wall for someone else to look at.
So, I mean, you mentioned that the photographs you used from your father originally were digital, so you grabbed them
Mhm.
off the web. But then it sounds like some of the process around that piece and maybe others of your pieces are quite physical, like kind of
Yeah,
gluing things together with paint and having so it has a little bit of a 3D physical
yeah,
aspect to it. So, how do you feel around how you express yourself, the difference between digital and when it's actually got your
yeah.
hands-on feel to it?
I think the digital things are usually a material. So it's like anything else where it's plaster, paint. I'll work with really like high quality digital prints and then also things that are just Xerox prints, like not precious material. I shoot a lot of film, analog film now too, so I think that's part of it where I'm also using that as its own process that can be manipulated, similar to how if you're making a painting or a drawing, you can like add a little here or do something there. Like doing a similar process that in the darkroom, which has its own limitations of control or the outcomes. My studio is very messy. So it's like there's a lot of stuff everywhere. And sometimes I'll have something that'll be like, I know this could be something. I don't know what it is yet. I just leave it out so I can look at it. Because some days studio productivity is just cleaning and seeing what I have and seeing something that I haven't seen in a bit. Other days it's like, I have a plan. I'm going to see what I can do with this image. And I think that's the other interdisciplinary way of working, of sometimes being productive is just thinking and not sketching, or I don't know, we all kind of have different ways of working. So I think the digital material is just another tool. It's another thing I have access to versus it being the perfect high quality print or X, Y, and Z. I do have some work that is more of like this like refined high quality image photography, but it's just another sort of tool within like a larger exhibition idea that I've had before.
If we just go back a step, I'm curious about when you made the transition from creative writing to visual art in various forms, and what it meant for you to to represent your work in a completely different form, to go from words to visual.
Yeah, I think like a lot of young people, I was like, I'm gonna be a novelist. I'm gonna write books. And I think I just had nothing to write about. I still like writing. I write often, but I think when I was 18, 19, I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna write about. And I think that was a challenge for me to express myself creatively because I knew what I was writing was not groundbreaking. It was very angsty 19-year-old writing. And I know that's like a thing that you have to kind of go through to get to the other side. Same thing with like art making. You have to make a lot of bad art before you start to figure out what interests you or how to make what you want to make. And I think now I write often just as a tool for my visual art, where I have sketchbooks filled with sentences or ideas or fragments of like even sentences. And I'm like, that could be a part of like an artist statement that I'll update eventually or things like that. But I think the transition just felt like it almost had to happen. Like the writing was a dead end. It wasn't working. It wasn't exciting to me. It felt like a chore where taking pictures and working in the darkroom was like I could have 5 hours go by and it felt like nothing. It almost seems like common sense of like, why would I be doing this if I can do this instead?
I find that super interesting because I'm curious right now about how different mediums might encourage or kind of allow us to express different kinds of things that we can't really express in other
Yeah.
ways. So things maybe you're able to do through visual art that didn't come to you to explore verbally.
Yeah. Even now, I have a much easier time writing about other people's art than my own. If I'm writing about someone's like exhibition or something, if I'm going to see it, I'm excited, I'm focused, I'm really interested in seeing the details of their work. And because I like materials and processes and things, I'm like looking at the sides of the whatever it is and upside down. And so I think for me, that's really a much easier process to write, like whether it's like helping with an artist statement or an exhibition review or an interview or something about somebody else and what they're doing than my own, because I think it's so in my own head sometimes, or thinking about 45 different things that I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And sometimes it really doesn't make sense until the end of making a project where I can really like articulate it. And even that is really stressful because I think I have more stress about sharing like an exhibition statement with somebody than the actual work because I'm afraid that it's going to be jargony or being like, this makes no sense or this doesn't look like how this reads. And then I would almost be like humiliated versus like, I know the visual art is like, I'm good with this. I like this. This is what I want it to be versus describing it in words because art and language can be at odds with each other a lot of times. I think a lot of times the reason that something is exciting or interesting to people is because it's hard to describe into language. Like a Rothko painting, for example, is like it's hard to articulate what it is because it can just be simplified of like, well, it's just oscillating shapes of color. What does that mean? Where there's probably PhD dissertations that are hundreds of pages long about why Rothko makes the work he does. So I think that's the intimidating part for a lot of artists of like, how do I put into words something that's not maybe something you can lend as much like oomph to it as it deserves, like an artwork.
What if I step back and ask you just the more general question of what vulnerability means to you?
Oof, that's a good one. I think there's a lot of different ways to think about it. I think for me, vulnerability is kind of knowing who you are and what you want to do. I think that can be challenging to figure out like who do you want to be because especially I think a lot of artists have these art heroes that they have, whether it's like their favorite artists or this dream of like, ugh, I wish I could be in the Whitney Biennial or something. And I think as you get older, like no matter how much you plan your life, it's going to shift and be unexpected, whether it's, you know what I mean, your own personal family or I don't know, opportunities. Like nothing really goes how you would think it's going to go, good or bad. So I think that's part of vulnerability of like being able to be open with that and understanding that things are going to change and it's okay to not have it be the exact plan that you thought it was going to be, whether it's something takes longer or you shift your mindset on something. So I think that's part of being vulnerable is checking in with yourself and knowing that you have to kind of be flexible and adaptive and know like, okay, this is not forever, or this is going to be something I'm going to work on, or this is where I want to go, like setting those kind of goals and knowing that some things are going to fall into your lap that are the most exciting, awesome thing ever. And other times it's going to be like a hard year or a challenging summer or something, and that those things happen and it happens to everybody. So I think that's for me kind of what vulnerability means to me most importantly of like knowing that it's not black and white for everybody and everything's very complicated and everybody has different situations that we know and don't know about, so kind of like being open to those exchanges and those things that are just gonna happen. Like I don't know how to say it in a way that seems more poignant than that, but I think that's kind of where I'm thinking of life is hard for everybody. And being aware of that and knowing that it's not a competition or you're not a failure if something didn't work out exactly how you wanted. It's just a part of the game. I just think what you're doing and your work is really interesting and this idea of vulnerability and I think it's an interesting almost like swing against things that are very popular in like social media and things where I feel like a lot of times things are kind of like I don't want to say one size fits all, but I think it's really refreshing to think about this like individualistic idea of what does vulnerable mean to them, or how does identity even kind of play into these things? Because I think none of us really know the answer. You know what I mean? I think that's the fun part of thinking about things like life and death and artwork is like there's certain things that we just don't know, and that's part of like how do we express that or communicate that. So yeah, I think the idea of just really thinking about being vulnerable with ourselves is really exciting because I make a lot of bad artwork that's like through the process of making that no one sees. And I think even that's part of being vulnerable of like I allow myself to make something and try to make something and knowing like if this didn't work out the way I wanted to and not be like devastated by it or be like I'm a bad artist or these things of just knowing that that's a part of how it shakes out. And then sometimes when I do experiment with materials or things, it's like I strike gold and I'm like, oh my God, like I would have never been able to plan this thing. It just came through this process of working. So I think that's another way of being vulnerable as an individual. It's like knowing you can make mistakes or, I don't know, embarrass yourself by saying something stupid. And like, it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't have to ruin your day. Like, I think that's a really good way to think about it. Of just kind of finding yourself honestly, knowing how to navigate that in the world.
You can learn more about Doug and his work through his website, douglasbreaux.com, and on Instagram at Doug_Breaux, and that's DUG_BRO.